Hello and welcome. Today I am joined by Heather from Tillberry Table. My name is Joy Cherick, and I am the creator of Nature Study Hacking and also the podcast However Imperfectly. And we will leave links below to where you can find us. And I was so grateful that Heather agreed to come and share with us today about composer study. Heather is a Charlotte Mason mom who has been a pastor's wife for 21 years. She is a mom to four teenagers, their ages 13 to 19 years old. And she has led a Charlotte Mason Moms Monthly Book Study for over a decade and is in the 10th year of leading a small Charlotte Mason co-op with kids from 1st through 12th grade. She also is the creator of her composer studies. You can find her over at Etsy at Tillberry Table. Her guides will help lead your family through a term's worth of composer study and help you form lasting connections with composers and their music. Welcome, Heather.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, well, I just would love for you to share a little bit about your family and your homeschool with us, just so that we can get oriented about how you came to create these beautiful guides.
Yeah. Well, my husband and I knew we wanted to homeschool before we got married. I had a friend who had some kids and she was already homeschooling. I was just going to do what she did. And our kindergarten year, my daughter did not like the beautiful workbooks that I had. And I did
Oh.
not like the unit study, that co-op that we were doing. It
Um,
just was not clicking with us. And a friend came to me gushing one day about this new method of homeschooling that she found. Um, and it was the Charlotte Mason method. And I was so excited. I just started researching and we dove right into it her first grade year. And I guess it was my first grade year also. And
yeah.
um, I'm still learning every year. There's so much to this beautiful method and it's still rewarding us. It was one of the best things, not just for our school, but our home, our family. Um, yeah. And eventually we started a co-op, and I led composer study. There were a
Mm.
couple of us who were a little more musical in the group. So my friend took hymn and folk song and I took composer study, but it was really hard. I didn't have a language for how to talk to the kids about the music.
Right.
But we went to narrate and it just was, well, what do you think of that? And we didn't know how to talk about it.
Right. You weren't able to draw out anything from the children because you didn't yourself have the language.
Right.
Yeah, that's so frustrating. I find that often.
Yeah,
So what did you do? How did you turn from that level of frustration to now you're writing guides for all of us and helping us really bring those pieces before our children?
Yeah. So since this was my area to lead, I just started researching and reading about these composers, learning about the pieces. As I
Mm.
chose the pieces we would listen to that term and had to pick which ones I wanted to do, I learned different stories about how they came to be written or interesting pieces, bits about the pieces. Um, and it got me so excited. I just started to fall in love with it and I wanted to share this and make it available for the families as they went home and listened. So I
Okay.
started putting together just little
Right.
guides for the moms in our group.
Right.
And I kept thinking about all the other families out there and the moms that were putting together this huge feast on their own and they didn't have a group. And I
Right.
just really felt led to make this available. Um, so just to help. So yeah, I just started small. I think I started my Etsy shop. I had one guide to offer, and every term, even now as we study the composers in our home, I write a
Mm.
new guide. So I'm just still going and writing them
Mm.
and learning.
Yeah, so it's a kind of creative outlet for you as well, and you're able to share something that you're doing with your community with all of us, which is we're always so grateful when the Charlotte Mason community has really in the last 5 years come out with so many resources to help families because the research, like you said, we're just able to do that. So I'm so grateful.
Yeah.
Okay, so we were talking about just one of the questions that you get asked the most often. And I want to put that to you here. And that is, what if I do not like classical music? How do you help moms who ask that question?
Mhm.
How do we go about it if we just don't like this kind of music?
Yeah, I know. It you're not very excited to jump into it if you don't like the music yourself. First, I just want to encourage you and remind you that our tastes can change. Um,
Hmm.
just like we encourage our children to try different kinds of food because we know that just by exposing them to it over time, it's going to it's called the mere exposure effect or the
Hmm.
familiarity principle.
Hmm.
It's a real thing, and we tend to develop a preference for things merely because we're familiar with them. And the same is true for us as adults, but it was actually true for the teachers that were being trained in Charlotte's school, which I thought was really cool. We're told that some of her students, now these are the students that are being trained to be teachers,
Right.
students with little previous knowledge of music have frequently said that it was through these weekly half hours of music appreciation that they came to love it. And those with more musical training have increased their powers of listening. Also, I'm one of those people that has a hard time having classical music on in the background at home normally because frequently the combination of kind of the chaos that's happening around me or even just what's in my own brain, it it's so overstimulating and I
Hmm.
just can't handle the intricacies of the music plus everything else. Um, so I found that having this designated time in my week where I can sit and just give my full attention to the music has been so enjoyable and delightful. Um, I end up looking forward to it more than the kids probably.
Okay, so that kind of moves us to the next question, which is really, you're talking about designating a time during the school week to sit down and listen to a piece of music, or really it's going to be one selection. So why should a really busy mother who already has 1,000 different subjects in a Charlotte Mason education add composer study to her very full day? What does that music do for us? And
Mhm,
how is that part of the education of the whole person?
mhm. Yeah, God has given us so much in the gift of music. I don't know if we can even put it all into words. Um, if we look in the Old Testament, 2nd Chronicles chapter 20 talks about how King Jehoshaphat's weapon of warfare as they marched out to battle
Mm,
was worship. The army was led by the musicians
the
and the
music.
worship
Wow.
leader. And Aristotle taught that music could affect human action. It could inspire or
Mm,
pacify. And
mm,
perhaps this was first exemplified by Saul and David, right? Saul played music to calm David played music to calm Saul's spirit.
right.
Um, music is a channel of communication, and our bodies are just wired to receive it and respond to it.
Mm,
Plato said that music training is a more potent instrument than any other because rhythm and melody find their way into the secret places of the soul on which they mightily fasten, imparting grace. And
wow. What a beautiful way to phrase that.
I know,
Thank you, Plato.
yes. And Charlotte Mason recognized this too. She says, many great men have put their beautiful thoughts not into books, pictures, or buildings, but into musical score to be sung with the voice or played on instruments. And so even the habit of attentive listening to the best music puts us into contact with living ideas that feed our brains, bodies, and souls, and brings us that fullness of living, expansion, expression, and serviceableness for each of us, depending on how far we apprehend these relationships and how many of them we lay hold of. We,
Yeah, it's so beautiful that she is kind of tying in what those other philosophers were saying. She did study them
yes.
regularly.
Hmm.
And I was actually I watched a video about what your brain does when you're playing music and what it does when you're listening to music, that it activates your entire brain. Like math, you're only working one part of your brain.
Hmm.
But when you're playing music, you're working your part of your brain for your dexterity. You're working the part of your brain, that emotional expression, and then you're the receiving. But then also just listening. They were talking about how you're oh, what is it that you're having to categorize and sort and figure out what different instruments are playing. Like it's doing
Yeah.
all of this really complex work for
Yeah.
your brain.
Yes.
And then that actually can help us in all of the other things that we're doing if we're looking at it from a, you know,
Right.
why do we want to do this perspective. But I think the other thing is that it's beautiful and we can learn what beauty is by looking at all the great pieces that have existed. I mean, that's what you're doing with yours, is you're kind of taking the best and the top from each of the
Mhm.
composers and saying, okay, well, they have so many, Bach, you can never listen to all his pieces
Mhm.
for one, 12-week session. He's got too many.
Yes.
Um, but we can get a taste.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
I would love to hear if you could walk us through, what does composer study look like? How much time do we need to set aside? Talk to me like I've just never even heard about this and I need some help figuring out how to implement this in my very busy home.
Hmm. Yeah. Essentially, it's attentive listening to some of the music of a single composer with the aim of becoming more than just acquainted with it, but familiar with it,
Hmm.
allowing our children to form a relationship with the composer and their music and some of the master ideas that each composer has to share. So, at the beginning of your term, I would introduce the composer. Obviously, it's a lot like picture study, where you want to introduce the composer in some way, whether it's through a biography. You could read a picture book. All of my guides come with a short biography that it's my narration of that composer's life. You could summarize that, or I like to spread it out and I just read a little bit over the course of the term
Oh, yeah.
as we go. Um, but the key to or the main reason we want to do this is to help our children put each composer in the historical time period that that composer lived in.
Hmm.
Um, in Charlotte schools, the composer didn't always match the time period they were studying in history, so
Yeah.
they really stress to their teachers like help your children connect the composer to their own historical time period. Um, and then it's very basic, like, we listen attentively, and then
How
we
long do we listen? Like if the piece is 20 minutes, are we going to sit for 20 minutes? I know the shorter pieces are way easier. I can
yes,
do a 4-minute piece.
they are, so here these are my thoughts, because in Charlotte's day, they were doing music appreciation for, like, a half hour, but they weren't listening to a piece of music for half an hour. It was 1905 when they started doing composer study. They didn't have CDs or iPhones or YouTube. They had a real person playing the music for
Oh,
them.
that makes it really cool.
Yeah, I know, super
But
cool.
you're not going to get the full orchestra in that
Right.
way. You're just going to get the gist of the song.
Right,
if it's on the
right,
piano or if it's a violin or
right.
it's probably piano. I don't know.
Yeah, piano or violin,
Yeah.
mostly piano. If it was an orchestral piece, a lot of times composers or other composers or music arrangers would transcribe something for piano. So you might hear some of the ideas and the elements of it, but it would still just be piano. So
Interesting. Cool.
they weren't listening to those super long pieces. Do you have a question? But
No, I'm just that's
so
clears a
my
lot up.
yeah, my thought is listen to a portion of it. If it's a really long piece, listen to just a portion. Maybe you want to focus on the beginning 5 to 8 minutes. Um, or you could listen to it in pieces. Like we read books a piece at a time. You might want to do that with a song. Another idea is listen to part of it during your scheduled lesson time, but then come back later with some popcorn or a snack or a craft and
Hmm.
make it a special time for everybody to just sit and listen and absorb this piece of music. That
Mhm.
helps build a habit and an atmosphere of music in our home, right?
Mhm.
Um, or find an alternative. If you're just sure that this piece is not going to be right for your student, whether they're young or old, it's just too long. You can,
Mhm.
you can pick something else. There are so many great. Just do a Google search for whatever composer and their top 10 pieces and find something that you think is going to be more suited. But with that, don't underestimate your children because they're often more capable than what we realize. And it's also good for us all to be stretched at times to sit through some of those longer pieces.
Yeah.
Um,
So
right.
I have a question. I'm going to put you on the spot because I didn't tell you about this question. Um, I have, we have had a couple pieces that had a full orchestra, and one of the ones I'm thinking of is Cesar Franck, and he had, I don't know, just he really showed off some of the different instruments
Mhm.
throughout the piece. And I was like, gosh, I really want to watch this on YouTube. So we pulled it up on YouTube and we found a really good one that was kind of showing like each
Mhm.
person as they played. But then I almost felt like, have I messed up? Because now now we've got this visual. I was like, I want them to have the visual about what the thing is. And we'd already listened to it. You see the tension between
Mhm.
using technology in a certain way and then watching it. I don't know, because you're not just listening, you're listening and watching. I don't know. Do you have a
Mhm.
thought on the tension between those two
Yeah.
using that medium?
I think they're both great. And maybe we switch back and forth to challenge ourselves. Like, what can we hear just with
Mm,
your ear? Like,
right,
let's not watch. Let's just hear with our ear and what instruments and things. We do a variety in our home. Some of the pieces we have a video for, and some we don't. I think it's neat to see the video because we can't always get to an orchestra,
right.
and so it gives the kids a chance to like see what is an orchestra like? What do these instruments look like that we don't have sitting around our house?
Sure. Yeah, that was the thing that I did. I pulled out, we have the visual dictionary, and in the visual dictionary, it has a full spread of the orchestra and how it's laid out and all the, how many violins there are and where the different things are set up.
Mhm,
So that was really helpful to get the visual on what the things sounded like. So many of them, I didn't know the difference between a lot of the wind instruments by sound. I'm just not
mhm.
familiar.
Yeah, no.
Um, but I mean, it really felt like dynamic. But to hear that, okay, Mason only had the piano, it's like, okay,
Mhm,
we have next level, we have more at
mhm,
our fingertips. But I think that's what becomes so overwhelming
mhm,
is that there's so much information coming at us that we really need help to filter and to just focus on one piece of music
mhm.
for a
Yeah,
certain period of time.
right,
Just
right.
this is what we're doing this week.
Yeah, so she would take one piece and they would focus on it for 2 weeks, but
Oh, 2 weeks. Okay.
Yeah, we pick 6 pieces for a 12-week term, and we
And
do
you'll
2
do for
each
2
week,
weeks.
but
Okay. And then on
the
your off week, do you do a picture study or how do you
we listen a second time.
and you listen a second time?
Yeah,
Cool.
so we'll listen 1 week to the song, and just like in picture study, you don't have to say a lot to introduce the song, you can let it speak for itself,
Okay.
um, but over time, you might or if you're using my guides and or you
Yeah.
know something about the piece, there might be times where you wanna set it up a little bit and give a little more introductory information, but we really want it to just be an opportunity for the children to connect with the music.
Yeah.
Um, we
That's
will
what I love about your guides is that you have these short, you can read it in one sitting. It's a couple paragraphs with a
Yeah,
story about the piece. And it really does start to tug at our hearts and pull us from our ignorance into the world of the composer and start to think about what they were experiencing at the time or what they were trying to convey. And it really starts to make the piece come alive to us. We start to become curious. And I think the curiosity is what's so important to getting our students and ourselves hooked to go, huh, I want to see what that's like.
mhm,
How did they, share that? How did they convey that through, this piece? So I love how you set it up. It's so simple. It really makes it accessible. What can get so frustrating with guides like this is that they can become so verbose
yeah,
that we're again at the stage of we're overwhelmed. We may as well just gone to Wikipedia with too much information,
mhm,
and now I'm back to square one. I'm sure you had to filter through so much
yeah.
just to get that one little blurb for us.
And sometimes it's hard to keep it to a blurb, and you don't need the guide to do composer study, you don't need to read every word from the guide, um,
Right.
but it's there. It's like just a concentrated source that
Yeah.
the teacher can use, and you can use as much or as little of it as you want, but you at least it there's tools before you that you can take advantage of,
Yeah.
um, so that when you come back to that, listening the second week to that piece, um, you're able to instruct your students about it more. And in Charlotte's days, it wasn't just this passive listening, there was listening with instruction. Um, and another
Was the instruction
so
on what to listen
instruction
for?
right, some of the technical parts of the piece, but whether it's the form or some
Mm,
musical terminology like a crescendo or a decrescendo. Um,
mm,
Rossini, for example, is a composer who's so famous for his crescendos that they have a type of crescendo that's called a Rossini crescendo, and a crescendo is just when the volume gets louder. So you can read about that in his guide, but
mm.
there was some instruction. It wasn't just music being played in the background, which I think is a really important thing that I hear a lot, like, "Oh, just put it on in the background."
Right.
Sometimes that's the best thing we can do for our families, especially if our family is just in a crisis mode, and that's all we can handle doing. But in her regular weekly lessons, it was intentional. We're sitting down and we're listening, and, they had a live musician playing for them. So they weren't just going on about their business in the background. They were attending,
Yeah.
respecting them.
Attending.
Yeah,
Sure, as you would a performance.
right. Mhm.
Yeah,
So
and I think that is one of the challenges about the media that we're using, and that's maybe why the screen does help, because then we are watching a person
mhm,
performing
mhm.
versus just listening. Then you only have your ears that are engaged and your eyes, I need hands to be busy
Yeah,
trying to figure out what the child should be doing when they're just listening.
mhm.
So I love that. So I was curious if you have a recommendation for which composer to start with for someone who's just getting started, is feeling really overwhelmed with all the options. There's, here, just pick a list. And it's like, I don't, I don't even know where to start. So what do you recommend?
Yeah. I'm trying to find my note. Um, okay. It's so hard to pick one composer.
Yeah,
I would
there are a
recommend,
couple. Yeah, give us
yeah,
top.
I would recommend like take some of the options that are before you and go listen to them. Look them
Mm,
up on YouTube. If you can take just a little bit of time, get a feel for them and find one that you feel like, oh, this, I really like this, or I
right.
think my child would like this. If you have a child who's really into Star Wars, Richard Wagner
I was
would
gonna say
be
Wagner, of
a great,
course.
yes.
I just loved when we did the Wagner study. I was like, oh, like all of, John Williams, who's the composer of Star Wars, he just stole so many little
Hmm.
riffs from
Yeah,
Wagner.
yeah. Wagner was the one who came up with that idea to have a melody representing a character. So,
Mm.
um, yeah, John Williams, that idea just grew, and it's something that John Williams is great at doing.
Yeah, my kids love John Williams and they just listen to him like
Yeah,
all the
my
time.
kids are begging me to write a guide on John Williams, so someday. But
Well, he's getting old, so he will be. Yeah, we have our symphony is performing him this spring, so we're going to get to go listen to John Williams, whatever exhibit
yeah,
essentially.
some
So,
other, yeah, some others. Um, Grieg, Edvard Grieg, was a Norwegian composer, and he has some really fun and really recognizable pieces, and just his piano playing is so delightful.
how do you spell his name?
Yep, Grieg.
Oh, okay, Greek.
Grieg. Scarlatti, Domenico Scarlatti, was an Italian composer, but
Okay.
he ended up traveling to Portugal and Spain, and he was influenced by the culture there, and that comes through in his music, and it's just really fun to hear.
Hmm.
Handel is always a great
Hmm.
composer to begin with, no matter what age you are. And there's a really great picture book called Handel Who Knew What He Liked that my
Hmm.
kids loved. And it does a really beautiful job of talking about his life and his music.
Okay.
And then I have to mention one more, Rachmaninoff.
Oh,
He
okay.
he seems to be one of everybody's favorites, and he's one of the best-selling guides that I have. If you
Really?
aren't familiar with him, I would recommend check him out. He has just a really interesting sound, and
Great. Well, and we'll link to all those guides down in the description so that people can check those out and get started. Um, well, did you have any other like kind of last tips to leave us with? Or I know you had a bunch of quotes that you wanted to leave us with.
um, let's see. I just music. It it is it is such a gift for our, not just our minds, but our souls and our bodies as well, and it's so healing. And I would just encourage moms to stick with it. It's hard when you're first starting, because the kids want to move around and dance, and you think, oh, they need to sit and listen. It's okay to let them express and experience the music. If they need to be doing something to keep their hands busy to help them attend to it, remember that habit of attention is something that you're building through
Mm,
music study and everything else that you're doing. My oldest daughter, she always needed to have something in her hands to be able to sit and listen. But by her senior year in school, her favorite way to attend during composer study was just with her hands folded and her eyes closed and the music just washing over her. And it was just, you could see it just ministering to her soul. So
mm,
don't give up and hang
mhm.
in there and just let those habits build and grow, because we're building an atmosphere and a habit for learning.
That's perfect. Perfect way to sum it up. Yes. And it really does feed our souls, it feeds our minds. And then we express ourselves through our bodies as well. So I just love that way to wrap it up. Well, Heather, thank you so much for joining me today and for sharing about composer study. I know so many families are going to be blessed by your work and by all that you shared today.
Mhm.
So thank you so much. And we will leave links. Heather is offering 20% off of her guides until August 31st of 2024. And you can use the code JOY24, JOY 24, for that 20% off code in her Etsy shop. And we will leave all the links below. All right. Thank you so much. And we'll
Thank
see you
you.
next time.